Holmes added, the only tragedy about Mead is that she still refuses to admit that she might have been wrong on her first field trip. Now, it was this extraordinary confession of Holmes that was, among other things, as far as I was concerned, a quite important reason why I should proceed with my refutation.
I don't believe that Margaret Mead was wrong on her first field trip. And the letter that I wrote to Derek Freeman, where he claims that I said that Margaret seems to find whatever she wants to, is what I wrote him. This is true. At the time, however, Margaret had just written a very terrible review about a book of mine, and I was pretty upset at her. I wrote this to Derek Freeman, not believing that it would appear again and again and again in print. I thought this was confidential correspondence. And I still stand by it. And I've had 4 field trips to the area. And I still stand by my statement that I believe that her description of Samoan culture and Samoan behavior was very good. I believe that she did a very credible job. And I think that many of the complaints that have been brought against her work by Derek Freeman are unfair.
Since the publication of my refutation, Holmes has become Mead's principal champion. At the beginning of 1987, he published a book called The Quest for the Real Samoa Beyond the Mead-Freeman Controversy. And in this book, he has evasively changed the conclusion that Mead reached.
Dr. Holmes, how can you possibly still consider Mead's work to be correct in view of the so many contradictions between her work and yours, and even contradictions within Mead's book itself?
I think that there are contradictions in Mead's book. I think that the society was perhaps a bit more complex than she pictured it. After all, this young woman was 23 years old. I think she probably made some mistakes. I think that she had perhaps a kind of a romantic view of the South Seas. Margaret Mead did distort the situation a little bit. Her picture of village life is a kind of a romantic one. What she did, she took typical activities that might occur throughout an entire year and sort of jammed them all into one day, giving the impression that a Samoan village is a very busy, bustling kind of place. I imagine this is a kind of artist license, and I don't know whether artist license is permitted anthropologists. I think that Coming of Age in Samoa was written for a popular audience. I think that the last chapter was added at the request of the publisher. I don't think that that necessarily affected the data that came before it, but I think that it may have affected some of the conclusions that she drew at the end.
Well, Margaret Mead went into the field and she talked to adolescent girls, and she came back with a view of Samoans as being gentle and living an idyllic life of having sex before marriage, as being able to try different things and not having the stresses and strains of American adolescence during the same period of life. Derek Freeman went in and he talked to the chiefs, and he came back with a view of Samoan life as being aggressive, and Samoans having a high rape rate, and being almost the exact opposite of what Margaret Mead had described. And so you could argue that neither that he was doing exactly what she was doing, except that he was 66 years old and she was 23 years old. He was doing what I call historical tracking. He was picking data out of different periods over long periods of time without concern for the changes that had happened during those periods. Not only the changes in terms of the Americans that were coming and going, but the modernization, the technology that was coming in, the schooling and how that was affecting people. It was all as if it were one period for him.
From what I have seen in Western Samoa and the people that I've talked to and what I've read about the debate, I don't see any significant difference in the society and people's behavior in 1928 between Western Samoa and Ta'u.
According to Mead, adolescence in Samoa is a period of promiscuity before marriage. Freedom of sexual experimentation is encouraged and even expected, with a girl distributing her favours among many youths adept in amorous techniques. But all other ethnographers report that both premarital and extramarital sex are strictly prohibited by Samoan custom. They describe the Samoans as a devoutly Christian people with a very severe sexual morality that was even stronger during Mead's time in Samoa. How then is Mead's account of free love in Samoa to be explained?
There's a double standard in Samoa. The young men have two objects. One of them is to have sexual relations with the girls as much as they can. The other one is to make sure their sisters don't have sexual relations with the other guys in the village. And a girl leads a very guarded, protected life.
Aside from just opinions of various people who were there or not, I find it extraordinary that people don't mention what Margaret Mead just passed off in her book, is that there were no pregnancies, which she admits in her book. None of these girls that she claims are engaging in sex ever got pregnant. And I find that to be extraordinary. In fact, she doesn't document any premarital pregnancies in any of the villages that she worked in. And I can't imagine that young girls who were presumably fertile, that she documents their fertility essentially in her book, that they weren't getting pregnant. And if they don't, I assume that there wasn't sex going on.
Could Margaret Mead have allowed herself to be fooled by the Samoan girls, on whom she relied completely for information?
Put yourself in the position of a teenage girl in an American colony which has been heavily Christianized by somewhat puritanical missionaries. And you know what puritanical missionaries are mostly concerned with. Once they got rid of headhunting, they want to get rid of anything like promiscuous sex or extramarital sex. Put yourself in the position of those teenage girls, and you have this rather ambiguous American woman, ambiguous in the political sense that she's hobnobbing both with government officials and with missionaries. And then she's trying to make cozy friends with you, and then starts asking you about your menarche and about your boyfriends and about how you get engaged and what do you do when you go in the bushes. I think you're just setting yourself up in any society, but surely in a society like that, you're setting yourself up for people telling you what they think you want to hear.
What comes through for me as I read over the material is the kind of warm, informal, day after day relationship that she had with those teenage girls. I think the idea of a systematic, sustained distortion is extremely implausible.
One of the main forms of entertainment in a Samoan village is what I call recreational line, which has several terms, tawha'se or tawha'alili, and it's the old pulling people's legs, pimping people. It's a basic sort of locker room humor from junior high school. All ages engage in it, and people tell you stories to try and get you to believe it, and then they sort of chuckle inside, and it happens continually. My friends used to do this to me all the time, and often it's about sexual matters, because Samoans appear to me to be very uptight about sex, and that's the thing that always brings a laugh. They say things about sex that they don't mean.
Perhaps in this controversy, the Samoans themselves hold the answer, and their evidence is of crucial significance.